Are you five, Miss Cross? I hope you had a lovely Easter. I know that I did. I did some baking, I did some gardening, I managed to enjoy some of the sun as well. So I hope you all had a fantastic time. I hope you've all managed to log on to Google Classroom okay. I sent out the logins and the passwords a couple of days ago, last week. So if you haven't been able to get on, just send me an email. Ask your parents, to send me an email, and I will try and sort that out for you. But hopefully, most of you I can see have managed to get on okay. So the work will now be sent on there. Okay. So, like I said, any issues, just get your parents to send me an email. Okay. So we're going to carry on now with our book. We got to page 86, and I wonder if anyone can remember what had happened. I'll give you a couple of seconds to try and think about what had happened and where we'd gotten to. So, we had got to the part where Alex and Connor had got into the Land of Stories, the book, and they were trying to figure out a way to get out because they thought they were stuck. The hole closed up once they entered, so they're trying to find a way to get out. So we'll hopefully finish chapter 5 today, and then obviously we'll go on to chapter 6 tomorrow. "Excuse me, may I help you?" said a proper voice behind the twins. They jolted at the sound of another voice besides their own. They turned around to see who it had come from, and once they saw, they both wished they hadn't. Standing behind Alex and Connor was what could be best described as a frogman. He was tall, with a wide face, big glossy eyes and shiny green skin. He wore a dapper three-piece suit and carried a large glass jar of lily pads. "Forgive me for eavesdropping, but I'm rather good with directions if you need some," he said with a very wide smile. Alex and Connor were so petrified that they were paralysed. If they needed any more evidence that they were in the fairy tale world, this was their proof. "You look awfully young to be in the forest by yourselves," the frogman said. "Are you lost?" Connor let out a high-pitched squeal that lasted much longer than it should have. "Please don't eat us," he said, and dropped to the ground in a fetal position. The frogman looked down at him with a frown. "Young man, I have no intention of eating you." Sorry, I've just lost my pace. "Young man, I have no intention of eating you," he said. "Is he always like this?" the frogman asked. Alex responded with a squeal almost identical to the one her brother made. I know, don't worry. I'm used to people screaming at me," the frogman told them. "Get it out of your systems. The shock will only last a minute." "We're sorry," Alex finally managed to say. "It's just that we're from... There aren't many, frog people where we're from. Sorry if that isn't particularly politically correct term for what you are." Connor let out another high-pitched noise. It wasn't a scream this time, but it was embarrassing nonetheless. The frogman studied their faces and paid special attention to their clothes. "Where exactly are you from?" "Pretty far from here," Alex said. A piercing set of wolf howls echoed through the forest. All three of them jumped at the sound. The frogman looked around the trees with fear in his big, glossy eyes. "It's getting dark," the frogman said. "We'd better get inside. Please follow me home. It's just a few minutes' walk from here." "Nice try," Connor said. The wolf howls echoed again. This time they were much louder than the first. Wherever the wolves were, they were getting closer. "I know I look scary now," said the frogman to the twins, "but I'm nothing compared to some of the creatures that lurk around these woods at night. I promise I will not harm you." There was such concern in his eyes, it was hard not to trust him. The frogman took off a brisk walk deeper into the forest. Alex nudged Connor. "We'd better follow him." "Are you crazy? I'm not going home with a giant frog," Connor whispered to her. "What do we have to lose?" Alex asked. "Besides our lives," Connor said. "But But despite his protests, he was dragged up by his sister and pulled in the direction the frogman was leading them. The twins hurried behind the frogman for a good while. They zigzagged between trees and jumped over boulders and tree roots that stuck up from the ground. The deeper they went into the forest, the thicker the trees became. It got very dark very quickly, and was almost pitch black by the time they reached the frogman's house. Alex and Connor stayed close together. With every step, they second-guessed if they had made a smart choice going with the strange creature. "This way," he said. The frogman brushed aside some dead vines growing over a large wooden door that was camouflaged into a side of a small hill. He pulled the door open and led the hesitant twins underground. He looked back into the forest, making sure they hadn't been followed, before shutting the door behind him. It was very dark underground. Alex and Connor were so close together they could have been mistaken for Siamese twins. "Forgive the mess. I wasn't expecting company," the frogman apologised, and a lit lamp with a match. Alex and Connor didn't know what to expect of the frogman's home, but what they were seeing definitely wasn't it. They were in a large room with dirt walls and a low dirt ceiling. Roots from a tree growing above them grew down like a chandelier. A cluster of big, cushy chairs and sofas, many of the cushions had the stuffing sticking out of them, sat in the centre of the room and were angled to face a small fireplace. Nearby, teacups and pots hung from hooks over a tiny kitchenette. To Alex's delight, there were books everywhere. Shelves of books lined the dirt walls. Piles of books were stacked on every available surface and on the ground. It was as if the room was infested with literature. "Connor," Alex whispered to come close to him. "Look around at this place. It's like we're having our own Lucy and Mr. Tumnus moment." Connor looked around and saw what she meant. "If he offers us Turkish delight, I don't care what you say. We're getting out of here," he whispered back. "It's a little dirty, but it's cosy," the frogman said. "It's hard to find a landlord who will house a frog, so I did the best I could with what I had." He placed his jar of lily pads on the mantel and immediately started a fire in the fireplace. He filled a tea kettle with water from a pitcher, placed it over the fire, and took a seat in a big white chair closest to it. He crossed his legs and folded his hands neatly in his lap. He was one proper frog. "Please have a seat," the frogman said, gesturing to the sofa in front of him. The twins reluctantly did as he asked. The sofa was rather lumpy, so they had to shift around in their seats to get comfortable. "What are you?" Connor asked the frog. "Connor, don't be rude," said his sister, elbowing in the side. "It's quite all right," the frogman said with a complicated smile. "I understand my appearance takes some time to get used to. Even I haven't fully adapted to it yet." "You mean you weren't always a frog person?" Alex asked as politely as she could. "Heavens, no," the frogman said. "I was cursed years ago by a very aggressive witch." "Why?" Alex asked. She was fascinated by how casually he said it all. "To teach me a lesson, I suppose," the frogman told her. "I used to be a very vain young man. The witch transformed my appearance so I would lose all of the things I took for granted." His wide smile softly faded. It had obviously been a very long and painful experience for him, and he still had a sad sense of loss and longing about him. The twins had never seen a frog look so sad. "I can't even imagine what that must have been like," said Alex, beaming with sympathy. "Can we call you Froggy?" Connor asked with a small smirk. "Connor?" Alex said. "It's quite all right," the frogman nodded, and his smile returned. "I've learned that the more people embrace their disadvantages, the less disadvantaged they become. Please, call me Froggy. I'd prefer it." Connor shrugged and smiled. "May I get you some lily pad tea?" Froggy asked the twins. Both the twins nodded. They didn't want to be rude. Froggy retrieved the tea kettle from the fire and hopped, literally, to the kitchenette and poured water into 3 cups. He opened the jar on the mantel and dropped a lily pad into each teacup and stirred. Do either of you take flies with your tea? He asked, reaching for another jar on his mantel, this one filled with dead flies. No thanks, Connor said, trying to quit. Suit yourself, Froggy said, and dropped a few flies into his tea. He handed them each a teacup and reseated himself across from them. They stared down at it for a few moments before deciding they'd at least pretend to drink it. What are your names? Froggy asked the twins. I'm Alex, and this is my brother Connor. A large and happy smile came to Froggy's face. Are you by any chance Alex Bailey? Froggy asked, grinning from ear equivalent to ear equivalent. Yes. Alex was shocked. How did this amphibian know who she was? As in, this book belongs to Alex Bailey? Froggy asked. He leaned over to the side of his chair and pulled up a stack of books, opening one to show where the phrase was written inside it. Those are my books, Alex said excitedly, recognising the books she had dropped into the land of stories. I was wondering what had happened to them. It was so peculiar, Froggy explained. I was out collecting flies and was walking down the path to the swamp when one just fell from the sky and landed on my head. I returned the next day and found several more in the same spot. It was the oddest thing that's ever happened to me. You mean besides turning into a frog, right? Connor asked. Because if I were you, that would be on the top of my list. Alex elbowed her brother. Froggy ignored Connor and went on with his explanation. As you can see, my shelves, I love to collect books, especially when I'm not expecting to, he said. And these books were unlike any I have ever read. They described people and places I had never seen or heard of, and I thought I'd seen it all. The authors wrote about such interesting places. Could you imagine a world without witches or trolls or giants? What imaginations! Froggy chuckled at the thought of this. The twins laughed along with the best fake laughs they could muster. Please keep them. I have duplicate copies at home, Alex told him. Froggy was delighted to hear this. Uh-huh. Connor cleared his throat. Speaking of home, I don't mean to interrupt this little book club, but we're very lost, and we'd like to know where we are. Froggy's glossy eyes went back and forth between the twins, watching them closely. Oh, children, you wouldn't be here if you knew where you were, Froggy said. You're in the dwarf forests. He had expected to get some sort of worried reaction from the twins, but Alex and Connor just stared up at him with very little expression. The dwarf forests? Alex asked. What are the dwarf forests? You've never heard of them? Froggy asked, completely appalled. The twins both shook their heads. It's a very dangerous place, Froggy told them. It's the only designated area of land without a ruler or a government. It's a kingdom where everyone is their own king. It used to be populated by dwarfs who worked in the mines, but now it's full of criminals and fugitives mostly. It's a place where people go when they don't want to be found. Knowing they had not only travelled into another world, but were in a dangerous part of that world, did nothing to help the twins' anxiety level. Are there other kingdoms? Alex asked. Froggy was stunned. It was as if she had asked him what colour the sky was. However, he seemed to be enjoying their unfamiliarity. Of course, he said. There's the Northern Kingdom, the Sleeping Kingdom, the Charming Kingdom, the Corner Kingdom, the Fairy Kingdom, the Red Riding Hood Kingdom, the Elf Kingdom, the Dwarf Forest, and the Troll and Goblin Territory. How can you possibly not know this? This was difficult for the twins to wrap their heads around. How big was the fairy tale world? Their puzzled faces inspired Froggy to hop out of his seat and cross to one of the bookshelves and return with a large rolled-up scroll. He handed it to the twins, and they unrolled it. It was a large detailed map of the new world they were in. The fairy tale world was a wide continent bordered by mountain ranges and covered in forests with castles and palaces and villages scattered all around. The Northern Kingdom was the largest of the kingdoms and took up most of the top of the map. The second largest was the Charming Kingdom, spread across to the south, And the third largest was the Sleeping Kingdom, which stretched along the east. The dwarf forests covered the majority of the west. The tiny corner kingdom was tucked away in the southwest corner of the continent, and in the northwest corner was the elf empire. In between the Charming Kingdom and the Sleeping Kingdom was the Fairy Kingdom, and just above that was the Troll and Goblin territory. And we will leave it there, okay, because we're going on to 15 minutes now. We haven't finished chapter 5 yet, but I'm hoping, well, I will read tomorrow until the end of chapter 5, so we can start on chapter 6. Please make sure that you're staying safe online, especially with us being on Google Classroom. Make sure you keep your passwords private. Make sure you don't use any real names, especially on the comments down below. And what I want you to tell me is, in the comments or on Google Classroom, why was Alex and Connor so afraid of the frogman, as they referred to? Okay, so in the comments or in Google Classroom, answer that question for me, and we will carry on reading this tomorrow, and I will see you then. Okay, bye, Year 5.